Hello again, world. I come to you from my car once again, and this time it's raining. So if you hear anything that sounds like rain, smattering on top of a car, well, that's what that is. Today I want to speak to you about truth, something that is incredibly axiomatic in our lives and in the, I would say, process of everything we know during our everyday life, right? Society, government, um, you know, just everything has to do with processes. Everything has to do with reality, ultimately, is something that depends on the axiom of truth and how you define that axiom. In any case, I don't want to get too technical with this sort of philosophical idea. However, the reason I'm bringing it up is from multiple motivations, actually, multiple streams of motivation. One of which is the most recent, which is I've been approached by a gentleman named James, another James from England. We've done a bit of work together in the past. He usually comes to me for editing advice or work. So either it's a text or one of his projects. Now he's come to me today to, review his work, and he's created something called a TSQ, which is the Truth Seeking Quotient, I believe. Let me just double check that. But he's got a website. Yeah, that's right, Truth Seeking Quotient. So we're all familiar with IQ, Intelligence Quotient, and maybe even EQ, which is something of a popularity nowadays as well. And according to Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory, since the, I think, 80s or 90s he's been developing it, is also something that isn't common knowledge or widespread as an idea that's adopted by people. However, you can see how we have multiple streams of intellect as well. So in any case, this is a different kind of quotient. It's a different metric that measures someone's ability or current status as a truth seeker. Current position, I would say, because I can have days where I'm a little bit more likened towards having truth be something that I'm willing to put my biases down for, and other times I sort of want to fight for my truth that I see from my own subjective perspective. So, in any case, this is an interesting project, and I'll be doing a video review of it later, so I don't want to go into it too much, but the idea of truth is an interesting topic for today, because the second reason I have, or motivation that's led me to talk about truth, is Nietzsche, which is my favorite philosopher. Now, I'm not sure how much I've talked about him in the past, or how much more I'll be talking about him in the future, but I can tell you this for sure. Everything that I normally talk about is definitely influenced by Nietzsche. In fact, a lot of societal norms to a degree, but a lot of societal knowledge and wisdom and whatever we take for granted in those sort of departments of wisdom, like psychology and sociology, a lot of it is derived from Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, I would say, as well. But yeah, modern sciences, like the social sciences and humanities, greatly influenced by Nietzsche. Sorry, I'm also drinking tea, so periodically I'll pause here and there. In any case, I've been watching some documentaries about Nietzsche. I keep looking for new things, which is getting harder and harder, because as much as he is influential, it's almost diametrically opposed in terms of people, I would say. I'm trying to create a turn of phrase that can really help me express this, but I'm going to break it down a little bit. As much as Nietzsche is influential, he's not popular. Okay? So, I was trying to find a good way to explain that, but yeah, it seems to me like the same amount of influence that he exercises, or that his thoughts have like impact on society today, it seems to be equally matched with how much people are actually interested in knowing about his life or knowing about his ideas, even though they think about his ideas or think his ideas directly without even realizing it. So that's kind of an interesting point of view when it comes to truth as well. Nietzsche in general is what I mean. He's got an interesting and perhaps the most insightful, I would say, no, perhaps not the most insightful. I would not like to say that about anybody, but I think he has the most insight in terms of an encompassment of truth. You know, how truth can be encompassed in terms of how we operate it, how we come to believe in it, and so on. He seems to have the greatest insight in that way. As to truths in themselves, whether transcendental truths or transient truths, you know, I don't think he could be credited with the one who's had the most insights, but he's definitely in the running for for having established some insights in that fashion. In any case, I have a lot of that recently. As much as I listen to his documentaries and try to find out something new about him, I'm usually hard pressed to find some, but I have been finding some recently, which is nice. So that's another motivation for why I want to speak about truth. He's got a lot of things that I think people should know about. And there was another thing, but it's not really coming to me right now. And out of nowhere, I'm a little bit apprehensive to continue the podcast because the rain is really, I don't know how loud it's going to be. In any case, truth, that's right. So today, that's the third thing. The third motivation is there's been so much political talk in these last 3-4 years, but also in my life currently. A lot of people are mentioning things or having political statements interject in our conversations that have anything to do, that have nothing to do with politics to begin with. So it's kind of interesting how I always come face to face with politics, and ultimately I realize, well, that's another axiom of truth. Not politics, but it has to do with truth, right? When we're talking about politics, it really is how people exercise their truths against others, or with others as well. So yeah, definitely a lot of motivations to be reflecting on what truth is, what it can be, and what it is not, right? Wow, I can't even hear myself think, it's that loud. I thought it was going to be a good idea, you know, like just feel the light pattering of some raindrops on the car, just kind of have a relaxing atmosphere. This is turning out to be a lot more noisy and distracting, but at the same time it's whipping up the energy I need to describe what it is that truth kind of imposes on us, or we impose on ourselves perhaps. So I'll press forward, I'll press on into talking about it. In any case, if I return to Nietzsche, he seemed to have really extrapolated truth from the human being, in the sense that he was able to see how it is that we come to place truth as the ultimate God, the deity, the epitome of what should be desired and sought after. And I don't think there's anything explicit about that in the terms of I'm not sure if there's any public intellectuals or even any passages that Nietzsche has that would exclaim that yes, that's in fact what his entire deal is, or that's one of the major themes in his entire philosophy, which is that we place truth as the highest value. To be honest, I'm pretty sure it's self-evident, but I could be wrong. And that kind of skepticism or self-skepticism is part of what it is that I'm trying to learn, and that's what I'm trying to practice as a function of what truth-seeking is, right? So, but I think if you read him, you'll see for yourself to a degree, and I would hope that it just confirms what I think is true about Nietzsche and what he thought and believed, is that, yeah, humanity seems to place truth as the highest value. So I think he definitely pointed out some interesting things that happen when you do that, particularly with Christianity. Now, he does come out and explicitly say this in, could have been the Genealogy of Morals or another one of his treatises about religion, but he kind of comes out to say that if you place truth at the height of the hierarchy of values, but the base on which you're placing that truth is lies, right, or constructions, if you will, then ultimately you will undermine the whole structure. So I'll give you a real example. Christianity is what he was talking about. He said that, if you place truth at the height here, and we'll go literally to quoting the Bible, Jesus apparently said, "I am the way, the truth, the light." Well, in that case, when religion starts to place its foundations on, human descriptions of what reality is all about and what morals should be, then you can see how the two are kind of incompatible, because you're placing truth as the source of all that is good and all that is real, and yet you have no objective way to extrapolate any of that truth from God directly. And so that's why it comes through people, right? How many people wrote the Bible? Many, 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 many people. And a lot of them wrote down what Jesus said. But, Jesus did not write the Bible word for word and also sort of give us undeniable proof that he is God for everybody in the world to really follow. So there's no way to say that there is an objective truth upon which we can base a book, for example, like that, and have it really build a solid framework for living. Because if it were that way, we wouldn't have the fights that we have, we wouldn't have war or anything, we would all agree, right? So in that sense, Christianity undermined itself, which is kind of ironic, right? Because it says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the light," and that's what you should always go for, truth. But then the moment that the people who follow that religion and try to honor that value go and look for truth, then their own kind, their own religion tells them, no, that's not truth, here's what truth is, because it's ultimately interpreted by people who are only projecting their subjective truths onto you. So that's why Christianity collapsed and why he exclaimed that God was dead, because we placed value at the top with no objective basis on which you can found that top value of truth. So it's pretty interesting, because Nietzsche went even further and said the same of science. He said science is almost like a distilled, pure version of Christianity, whereas it really restricts itself to truth in an even more radical fashion. Whereas in Christianity you could at least have archbishops and priests and popes study and record nature and try to interpret facts about reality and truth. Science does the same, but with the scientific method, right? And so it really restricts itself to that. What is truth is what science has proven, and until it has proven something, truth is not there to be found. But how do you operate life, right? How do you decide whether abortion is right or wrong, or whether homosexuality is a good or a bad thing, or whether you should be able to kill someone for a specific reason or not? All these things, science cannot really tell you what the truth is, because although science can tell us about the world, it can't tell us how the world should be. That's a very famous sort of maxim from Hume, who said you can't derive an ought from an is. I'm paraphrasing that. So that kind of that's where we are today, is what I'm trying to say. Is we've realized this, it's come into the world's consciousness, and it manifested itself as postmodernism, which were some French philosophers who started that movement back in the 50s and 60s, who were dissatisfied with culture and with Enlightenment thinking, and so they just started to deconstruct truths. So deconstructivism is basically kind of what Nietzsche was doing, but he wasn't doing it in order to tear down all objective, transcendent truths. He was just doing it in terms of trying to show people that, we can all deconstruct everything. At least, in my personal opinion, we can all deconstruct truths, and all the truths that we deconstruct will reveal that we cannot construct truths that are transcendental, right? And that's not to say that there are none. However, I do believe that Nietzsche left enough of a margin or a gap open for us to realize some of the subtleties that he was trying to express, which is, perhaps there are transcendent truths, but you definitely won't get there by constructing them. And that just makes sense, right? That sentence itself makes sense. If there are transcendental truths, there is no need for you to construct any transcendental truths, right? And the moment that you construct one, it's not transcendental. Because if you could transcend truth by constructing it yourself, then you would be God. I mean, everybody would just listen to what you have to say right away and fall to their knees in absolute elation of this revelation, right? So I think we all treat ourselves like that, like the prophet on the mount, handing down transcendent truths to all the ignorant below us. And that's really not the truth, right? I'm not saying what the truth is, but I can definitely say what the truth is not. And it is not the truth that either the leftists or the right-wingers or the jihadists or the Christians or anybody else, it is not true that they know something that everybody else does not. And no matter how much conviction any individual has or a group has, like influence, there's no convincing any rational truth seeker that transcendent truths are coveted by any one kind of description or construction. So that's something that's relevant to us today. We definitely need a lot more of that realization, because as much as it was a gift to the world for us to realize this whole idea, or let's say untruth, that truths can't be constructed, we've pressed forward into constructing truths anyway. So we kind of almost completely missed the point, or used the point to our advantage to continue constructing. It's like, let's deconstruct, and that deconstruction is a truth in itself. And that seems to be what Foucault and Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir seem to have done, right? It's like, well, everything's a social construct, everything's a construct. Maybe even Derrida, right? He went so far as to say language is completely constructed. And Wittgenstein had echoed the same thing, where I would say, I'm not sure who came first, either Derrida or Wittgenstein's Tractatus. In any case, even Wittgenstein, who is considered probably the first and foremost authority on language, in terms of a philosopher who knows what he's talking about, even he admitted to his own mistakes later on in his life. See, he only wrote, I think, the one book, and then left philosophy behind afterwards, and then returned to it only to discredit himself. So, language, it's hard to deconstruct in a manner that allows you to justify constructing another truth. So how is it that postmodernism is taking root? Well, that's the reason right there. People think, oh, it's easy, deconstructivism is something we can all practice. And if we can all practice it, then it must be the truth. But that doesn't make any sense, because in order to live life, in order to make sense of things, in order to cooperate, in order to establish any kind of virtue or value. You can't just sustain those things by deconstructing everything. It's kind of like saying, I can destroy a house, therefore I'm able to live, in the home of nothingness. That's pretty much what nihilism is all about, right? It's like, well, nothing is true, so everything is meaningless. And of course, there's probably lots of arguments against that, and people would say, that's not what postmodernism is about. But ultimately, if there is a truth to be agreed upon when it comes to postmodernism, it's that there are no truths. And that in itself is a paradox, because if there are no truths, well, is that the truth? That's something my friend Oliver says a lot, right? And it's true. I mean, it's the best argument you can have for someone who believes in no truth. It's the nihilistic paradox, right? So in any case, there's a need for that. There's a need for people to move beyond postmodernism, but still honor what Nietzsche had talked about, right? Which we took and completely went off the rails with, which is, yes, that truth is incredibly subjective. It's not to say that there are no transcendent truths, but it is very subjective, and we need to realize that. We need to approach it with a healthy skepticism, and ultimately develop and derive our own morals and values, right? He was an individualist to that degree. So I think even if you are someone who enjoys the ideology of a very, very fundamentalist group, you still need to think for yourself on some level. And the less you think for yourself, the less agency you have in the world. And the less agency you have in the world, the more you become abused or abuse yourself. So whether you're part of a group or not, or recognize that you're part of one or not, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, you do need to function in relation to truth in a manner that's a bit more healthy than either being subservient or submissive towards some ideology, or doing the opposite, which is to withdraw and start believing that there are no truths. Because the only alternative is suicide. And, I have no problem with that either. You can go ahead and do that. But if you don't want to do that, I would go so far as to say the only alternative you have is to seek truth. Right? And so what does that mean, right? I haven't really said anything about truth, have I? I've said everything about what humans do and don't do, and how we, what our relationship to truth is so far. So that's not really saying much as to, okay, where's the direction, James? What are you saying? What's the next step? Well, if I were to begin saying that, I would start to betray everything that I just said. It's like, cool. It's not that there are no truths, but a lot of, or everything of what you guys are believing in is not true as well. So there you go. Just walk away. Yeah, it's kind of funny to do that, right? But I can't very well say those two things and then proceed to say, here's what's true. It doesn't make any sense. So my whole point is, recognize that truth is very mercurial. There are many facets of it, and that there are transcendental truths out there. Now, whether that is true or not is another debate in itself, but I would claim to say that paradoxes prove that truths are transcendental, like the nihilistic paradox I just outlined, which is, if you say there is no truth, isn't that a truth in itself? So, whether truth is defined to be something that exists or does not exist, from that contextual perspective, I would say transcendental truths exist, and they are paradoxes. And that's why my whole philosophy is founded on that. But that's neither here nor there. It's just to say, if you realize that there are transcendental truths, and at the same time realize that, the ones that we hold are definitely not the ones we should hold as the epitome of all things and how we should derive value from therefrom. So if you place your truth at the top and you say that's the most valuable truth to follow, you're undermining yourself, is what I'm saying. To continuously rely on your seeking of the truth while realizing that there is one to seek for, I think is where Nietzsche was getting at, and is incredibly valuable as an individual who's really trying to move past, the limitations of life and of the weaknesses of human beings. It's why he called it the Übermensch, which is to say the overman, meaning beyond human, not superhuman, but beyond. But yeah, that's what I want to express today. And I think this TSQ thing, just to mention it again in passing, which was the truth-seeking quotient, is an interesting and practical application you can implement into your life if you're really interested. And so perhaps I'll speak more about it later on this podcast. I'll give you the website and everything, but also I'll be making a video about it soon. And several. There are 5 modules, I believe he said, so he's contracted me for all of 5, meaning I'll be presenting some kind of video for each one. So yeah, do you want to look for truth, and how do you look for truth? Well, there is a starting point, and that starting point is not any one person's idea. It's a collection of ideas that we've kind of come to a consensus on over time as a human species about how we can properly search for truth by cooperating. So yeah, very interesting notion, and I think we can all benefit from that kind of activity to always seek for truth. And I know that it's not completely pragmatic or practical to just seek for truth all the time. It takes a lot of time and energy, things that we don't always have, but it's still worth it if you feel that you're facing some kind of existential void and there's just no sense to living anymore, which I would strive to say is probably the condition of a lot of people, whether they admit it or not. And again, even further, I would say you probably do have the time and you probably do have the energy. It's just you're sinking it in either playing video games or shopping or eating or whatever. In the first world, if you're listening to this podcast on your phone because you have data and you're in the middle of, a gym or something like that, that's something that proves that you have the money and the time, because a phone is very expensive and it takes energy to work out. And, it's not like you're some kid in sub-Saharan Africa who doesn't have access to the internet and doesn't have the energy to walk the 12 miles he needs to walk every day to get water. So if anybody suffers from existential dread, it is the privileged and wealthy. And so make do with what you have to find and fulfill yourself, right? I'm sure if I was one of those sub-Saharan kids and I saw how people are wasting their lives and they're still unhappy, yet have all the resources they need to allow themselves to take the time to nourish themselves and become fulfilled, I'd be pretty disgusted. I'd be like, yeah, no, that's not how I'm gonna, use my time if I have that opportunity. So, yeah, hopefully this was a bit encouraging or enlightening, and that the rain wasn't too distracting. But I think this has been a great episode, and I look forward to doing more like this that seem to be a little bit more clear-headed and not so much sporadic with the ideas I normally have. This definitely has a little bit more of a cogent kind of idea, an overarching theme. All right, guys, till next time, take care.